All right, everybody. Like I was telling y'all in the opening of our podcast today, I brought back an old friend. I shouldn't say old friend, but I promised he would probably come back in a few months. But we decided, heck, man, let's bring him back this week. So I'd like to welcome back Brian Lass, wrestling historian, wrestling just genius, all the way around to the show and booking the territory. How you doing, Brian?
The great Brian Last.
The great. How did I miss
You
that? The
have to get
great
my
Brian
gimmick
Lass.
if you're gonna bring me
I
on.
You're right. You're right about that. The great Brian Lass. Brian, I thank you so much for doing the show this week on such short notice as you are getting ready to head off on going away. Let's just say that. But yeah, I appreciate you doing it on such short notice, and we got some great topics to discuss.
Cool, no problem. Anything I could ever do to help a friend. And also, I got such a great reaction after the last time I appeared on your program that I thought it would be fun. It was a fun conversation we had. But before you get going with your things, I'm going to hijack this proceedings again. Um, Last time I was on, I mentioned to you that the original JYD blinding by the Freebirds was on YouTube. Did you end up watching it?
I have it bookmarked to watch later. I've been so busy, I haven't watched it yet. But my plan is to do so. It is bookmarked and ready to go. I just haven't had a chance.
Okay.
You were going to ask me a question about it?
Oh, no,
Did that ruin it?
I was just curious. I mean, the most famous angle in the history of Mid South wrestling. You from New Orleans. I was wondering if you had
Yeah.
gone anyway, but obviously, you don't care enough about the JYD. I mean,
No, what it is right now is I am in the midst of summer baseball with my 11-year-old. So any free time I have is just a struggle at this point. So that's where I'm at. But I have it bookmarked. I can't wait to watch it. As strange as that sounds, we're wrapping up shortly this season. So I got a bunch of things I'm going to get to. One of the things we're kicking around before we get into our topics is we are thinking of starting a Smoky Mountain wrestling review show
oh,
and discussion because my co-host Doc Turner, who you haven't met yet, he started binge watching it probably about a month or two ago, and he's 60 episodes in at this point, I think, and he's in love with it. And so I started binge watching it. No, not binge watching, but going back and watching the first couple episodes. And I'm like, man, we're on to something here. It's too bad this didn't make it because Jim had a good thing going, man. So and remember, we're two guys who did not have access to Smoky Mountain. So watching it on YouTube has been a bit of a joy.
yeah, it's good. And if he's about 60 episodes in, that means he's in early 93. And it was really good from the beginning. But then to me, it really picked up steam late fall of 1992. That's when Kevin Sullivan is brought in as the surprise. Well, I'm going to ruin it for you. I'm planning to play spoiler for you.
No, 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 no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Kevin Sullivan comes in as this mystery man and stabs Brian Lee with the spike, which is a big angle. Tracy Smothers shows up. It's one of the greatest things ever. You know, I don't hear it talked about enough, but Tracy Smothers had been in the Wild Eyed Southern Boys. And then for some reason, Dusty Rhodes decided to change them from the Wild Eyed Southern Boys to the Young Pistols. And all of a sudden, their hometown was billed as, I think, Cheyenne, Wyoming. So after he gets out of his WCW contract, Jim Cornette brings Tracy Smothers in to be his top babyface. And the first interview he does, he's like sitting on the porch of his house and he's very calm and nice. He goes, "Oh, I'm so happy to be back here. I love the fans. And, you know, I got to admit, they said I was from Cheyenne. I've never even been there. I got nothing against those people, but that's not my hometown. This is who I am. I'm, you know, the wild-eyed Southern boy." So that's going on. And then one of the coolest things ever is just the three-way feud that goes on for a few months between the Rock and Roll Express, Jim Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies, and the Stud Stable. The Stud Stable being Robert Fuller and Jimmy Golden, and Dutch Mantell aligned with them. And then eventually the Heavenly Bodies have Bobby Eaton aligned with them, and Rock and Roll Express have Arn Anderson aligned with them. And it's just awesome. It's just total awesomeness. And you have Bob Caudle and Dutch Mantell doing the commentary, and they are maybe the most underrated commentating team of all time.
So he has been telling me because he's gotten to the Kevin Sullivan incident. He was in Tracy Smothers being brought in, and his exact words. It's funny you mentioned that. We haven't recorded that part, but he said, "Dude, it's really picking up steam right now." So it literally what you just explained. He's telling me because he's gotten to that point, mentioning. At least I want to say he's 60 in, but he's talked about the whole Kevin Sullivan angle. The whole Kevin
Yeah.
Sullivan with the stabbing, I'll call it. He's also referred. You'll know what I'm talking to about some incidents with Jim Cornette with an ether rag.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So he's talked about that. Anyway, we just been kicking around the idea. He goes, man, he goes, we might be on to something. He goes, we need to start reviewing it. He goes, we need to do a separate show where all we do is talk Smoky Mountain. And because his thing is he grew up in World Class or WCCW with the Von Erichs. So this was his territory, that territory was. And he didn't have any exposure to it. He's like, man, he's like, this is great. We got to talk about it. I'm like, sure, man, we'll do so. So it's good stuff, man. I gotta say it really is some it's entertaining. I've only seen a few episodes so far, right? So but he has warned me or told me, not warned me, just get a little bit into it. He said it starts to pick up steam. He said the first couple are slow, but you'll get into it. So that's where I'm at with it right now. I think I'm only on episode like 3.
Oh
So
yeah, please.
yeah,
You're not
I got a
getting it
ways to
all.
go.
Yeah, because again, at the beginning, I forget if it's the first 4 episodes or the first 2 episodes, but those are actually like the pilots that Cornette produced to try to get different television stations. So
Right.
you really start picking up steam after that. You know, Ricky Morton's not in there for a while, so it's just Robert Gibson. Brian Lee's the top guy. You have Paul Orndorff. You have Ron Garvin. The Heavenly Bodies you haven't even seen yet because they're building them up. They haven't
Right.
debuted. It really starts picking up steam by like the summer. And then, like I said, the fall, it goes up. And then by 93, you have Chris Candido show up. Tammy Fitch. You know, Sunny has become like this. You know, people just laugh at her at this point, but you forget she was
Right.
amazing as Tammy Fitch. Forget about Sunny. As
Hmm.
Tammy Fitch, she was the best female valet / manager since early Missy Hyatt. She was extraordinary, and she got heat off the charts. So by the time you get to summer of '93, Smoky Mountain's just on fire.
It's funny because when people hear you say that, they go, "Really? She was that hot?" Well, yeah. I mean, you'd have to go back and see it, but she was hot. Not hot in two
Well,
ways. You
yeah,
know
I
what
was
I
going to
mean?
say, I was talking about her heat. I mean,
Yeah,
don't get
I
me
know what you
wrong,
mean.
she was very attractive at that time, but
Right, right. No. When I say hot, I mean she was white hot with her heat. She had it
yeah,
going.
there's a
So
famous story that Jim Cornette always tells, and apparently someone has the video. He told me recently, and he's going to try to get a copy of it. Where there was a show in Barberville, Kentucky, which was a town unlike any other town I've ever been in. And at the show in Barberville, I guess she was managing Brian Lee, and at some point the heat got so big that they got separated, and some big woman out of the crowd like grabbed Tammy by the hair and dragged her across the room. Yeah, I mean that's how the heat was with her, and she was great. I mean that was the thing. She really was. It's not like just you looking back and going, "Oh, she was great." She was great at the time. Everyone realized she was great.
right. Uh, I'm looking forward to it. So we're gonna dig into it, and we are seriously contemplating dedicating a show that would run every 2 weeks to just Smoky Mountain discussions as we recap them and watch them. So
Very,
I'm looking forward to it.
yeah, man, that sounds cool.
All right. So what I wanted to talk to you about today because these are some things that I had thought of, and then I remember this first topic. I was watching Heroes of World Class years ago, the documentary that was made, and there was a point in the documentary where they said, you know, people. It was mentioned to Fritz to try to go national. Now, maybe I'm not remembering it right, but I remember there being at least some discussion on the film of maybe someone trying to convince Fritz of going national. Do you recall anything like that?
It's been a while since I watched it. I really like that film. I want to say it was Kevin Von Erich who said that they were trying to convince their dad, Fritz, that it
Right.
was the time to go national, that they were that hot, and he, of course,
Right.
wasn't interested at the time.
Right. He wasn't interested. So my question for that is, as someone who's a wrestling historian, it's I know this is hard to do, but put that today. What if they did go national? The key is at the height of their popularity because I think that's a key. I think you can't say what if they go national in its later 80s because we all know what happened once the late 80s came. But if they go national towards the height of their popularity, if we were to kind of say what if, or if we were to go, you know what, I wonder what the wrestling landscape would look like now. Have you ever thought of that, and what are your thoughts if they did go national at that height of popularity?
I've thought about it a little bit. I guess if we're talking the height of world class popularity, it has to be somewhere between 83 and 85.
Right?
David Von Erich dies the beginning of 84, but world class is still red hot in 84. A lot of people have this false idea that it was the Von Erichs and the Freebirds, and then after that, everything was downhill. But The Von Erichs against Gino Hernandez and Chris Adams was equally as hot a feud. It may not have turned the territory from being a sleepy little territory into an exploding territory, but it maintained what they had built up. So you have 2 years there, 83, 80, or 3 years, 83, 84, and 85, where World Class is at its peak. In terms of going national, you got to think it wouldn't have happened before Vince Jr. did what he did, just because Fritz had been a powerhouse in the NWA, and the NWA was still a thing at that time.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't want to go out there and go against the people who were technically his partners in this cooperative. They may not have been, splitting the money together, but they all paid dues into the same organization, the NWA. So let's say we're talking 85. I think the first thing that would prohibit them from successfully going national is the size of the roster. If you really look at it, in those 3 years where World Class was at its hottest, the roster is actually very, very small. It's the Von Erichs, and when David's there, you have 3, and Mike gets introduced right before David dies. So then after David passes away, you still have Mike. So you have 3 Von Erichs.
Right.
For a while, you had Chris Adams on the babyface side. Eventually, he would turn heel. You had Iceman Parsons on the babyface side. On the heel side, you have the Freebirds. In 84, May of 84, Gino Hernandez returns. Jake Roberts is there for a cup of tea in late 84 before he goes to Mid-South after he left Georgia. You have Devastation Incorporated, various forms of them. You have Kabuki. It's really a short roster. It's not a big roster. I mean, the Fantastics and the Midnight Express are there in 85, and one of the complaints that Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express had was they were working every single night with the Fantastics. They never even got to the Von Erichs.
I remember him saying that on a podcast. Yeah.
So it's a very small roster in terms of going national. You would think if you went national, you would still want to hold down Dallas. They were still running weekly in a lot of towns, not just in Dallas. So if you go national, you don't have enough people for a split crew. So you'd have to really increase the amount of people coming in. They had a very small office, maybe the smallest office of any of the territories.
They did.
I mean, that's the thing. World Class Dallas was a sleepy wrestling town in so many ways, especially after the Dallas booking office stopped controlling the shows that would be Southwest Wrestling, Joe Blanchard, and the shows that would be Houston. I mean, no one controlled Paul Bosch, but Paul Bosch was using the Dallas booking office for much of his talent. And then he switched from that office to aligning with Joe Blanchard and still doing other things like bringing in Nick Bockwinkel or whoever. And then he would go from that to Mid-South Wrestling, where he would bring in the stars from Bill Watts' territory. So the Dallas booking office was just doing Dallas and the surrounding towns. So it was really, I mean, look at before the Freebirds got there. It's, the Superfly, the masked Superfly and Al Madrill, and it's not very good.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's true.
I don't know if they would have had the roster to go national. They did go to Boston or, around Boston several times. And John McAdam was actually on my show talking about this once. The first time it was a big thing and people went crazy for it. And then it lost its steam whenever they came back. So, I mean,
really?
Yeah. So that's the one town outside of Texas that they went to was Boston, Massachusetts. And it started off hot and quickly faded. And it was on TV there, and apparently it was doing really good ratings. In the documentary, they say they were on TV in New York and doing better ratings than Vince. I don't believe that was true. Not even necessarily the ratings. I'm not sure where they would have been on TV in 1984 and 1985, specifically for the New York market. They wouldn't get on ESPN even for a while. I don't think they got on ESPN until 86, maybe 87.
Yeah, it was. I remember that. That was. You're right. 86, 87. I do specifically recall when they got to ESPN, but that was well past to me their heyday.
Yeah, the Von Erichs were big names in St. Louis, so that town would have been a natural for them to go into and try to do something. Fritz had been a big star there. Kerry and Kevin and David had all been stars there. Kerry had been the Missouri champion in 83, I want to say. Definitely 80, maybe 82, 83, somewhere in there. So the Von Erich name was really big in St. Louis, but if you're really looking at it, where are they going to go? Because it has to come off the strength of the television. The television was seen in a lot of places. Look, it was seen in Mid-South wrestling towns. And that's why the Von Erichs were brought into Louisiana and Oklahoma as touring attractions.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where else they would have gone. The Von Erichs weren't big names in Los Angeles. They weren't big names in San Francisco, both towns that had been shut down and run by Vince McMahon. Kevin Von Erich wrestled in Georgia for a bit in '82. David Von Erich was a heel in Florida in '81. I don't know. I don't think they really did much in Mid Atlantic, if anything. I mean, obviously they were on the covers of a lot of magazines. Bill Apter loved them, and he gave them a ton of coverage nationally in the magazines. But that's it's all about the TV. It's all about the strength of the TV.
You got that right. I mean, that without the TV, you have nothing. So if I'm hearing you correctly, then this is interesting because I've heard people who have been longtime wrestling fans go, oh, if they just would have, branched out, they could have been, let's just say for the sake of argument, they could have been what the WWE is now. But you make a compelling point. They had a limited roster, not limited, a small roster. They had capable people, obviously, but they had a small roster. So it sounds like, from your view as a wrestling historian, it would have been really hard for them to be successful nationally over the long haul.
Yeah, when Vince McMahon Jr. went national, he had multiple crews. He was able to hold down his main territory, even running tiny spot shows still in Brooklyn and Queens and New Jersey. When he had another crew in, Los Angeles or Minnesota competing head to head with Vern Gagne, he had multiple crews. At one point,
Yeah.
they had 4 shows a night. I mean, for the most part, throughout the '80s, after he went national, he had 3 shows a night. He had 3 crews actively working at one time.
Yeah.
When Crockett, started doing his national push, even before then, when he was just a regional territory, they had enough people to do 2 shows a night. When it was just Mid Atlantic Wrestling, they had enough wrestlers to do 2 shows a night. When he purchased the Championship Wrestling from Georgia office and Georgia Championship Wrestling, I guess you could say too, all of a sudden he was running 2 separate crews a night. He had a crew in Georgia. When the Midnight Express first went to Crockett, they worked specifically in the Georgia end, which was being booked by Dick Slater. And then they had
Yeah.
Dusty in the Mid Atlantic end. You had enough people for 2 crews there. But you don't have that with World Class, because even if you split the Von Erichs, if you say Kevin goes to one town and Kerry goes to another, and then you try to split the crew, okay, let's say we do Kerry and Gino, and then we do Kevin and Chris, and we have the Midnight Express versus the Fantastics in one town, and Jimmy Garvin's gone already by '85, so you don't have him. And then, what do you have in the other town? The Missing Link versus the Iceman. If the Freebirds are there, either as baby faces or heel, you have the Freebirds versus who?
Yeah.
There isn't enough people.
You got a good point. I mean, yeah, it would be hard to split the roster. You send Kevin to one town, you send Kerry to another. It's still.
And then you have the issue of them showing up.
Well, I wasn't gonna go there, but since you said
I mean, I'm not trying to insult them.
no, 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 I know exactly what you mean because it rings in my mind what One Man Gang was telling me that time where one night he was working at the Sportatorium and Kerry was supposed to be working with Rick and not and Rick's in the ring and Kerry's in the car and I want to say Gang said he's got his boots laced together because he wasn't in the right state of mind.
But at
And
least there he's at the place. I mean, look,
that's true
but
too.
there are many times, especially those small shows in Texas, where the brothers just kind of blew it off. Like, hey, we're not going to go tonight. We're going to stay home and do whatever.
Yeah.
That happened a lot, and it hurt towns. And if you go national, who's to say that won't happen again?
That's true. No, you got a good
And
point.
if it happens once, if you build up, give me, a random town. If you build up Kansas City, let's use a terrible wrestling town.
Right.
Not that it's a terrible wrestling town, but the promotion was terrible. But
Oh no, yeah,
let's
yeah.
just use Kansas City as an example.
Mhm.
If you build it up off TV for 8 weeks, Kerry Von Erich versus Gino Hernandez, and then the day of the show, Kerry Von Erich's not there, those people are never coming back for another show.
Never, because you've lost them.
Right.
At that point. Because here's the thing, while they may have had world class on the TV market, in their TV market to be able to watch it, the fact that and back then, remember, you still were making money off of the gate. I mean, you're not that you're not making the money off the gate now. What I'm saying is back then you did the TV, but there was money to be made at the house.
Yeah.
So you do that, you just killed that town, and you're not going to make that money at that house anymore. It's just not going to happen. That's interesting, man. I've always wondered. I remember them talking about it in that video, and it's always kind of fun to go. Oh, I wonder if that did happen. If they could have made something out of it. But I do see how it would have been extremely difficult given the the not limited roster, just the sheer number. You didn't have a deep roster, so to
No,
say.
I think they would have been more successful if it was kind of like a Ringling Brothers thing where, if every, let's do this under the assumption everything works out and, there's no, the tragedies are minimal and it's an active
Right.
territory that's working. I think because of the roster and because of who was working there, it works better as a show, a crew that comes to a town once a year. It's like a big thing you build up. I don't know if people are going to return month after month after month, but if it was, I finally get to see the Von Erichs live, I finally get to see the Freebirds live.
Hmm.
There was a time that would have worked in a lot of places, but I don't know if it would have
Yeah.
worked as a regular weekly or monthly thing at that time.
No, it's interesting. It's good to get your thoughts on it. Like I said, it's something that intrigued me. Another thing that intrigued me, speaking of the word intrigued, is Vince McMahon, WWE, struggling in the mid '90s, as is chronicled well. Let's say, just again, sake of discussion, WCW defeats Vince. But we both know that even if that would have happened, the people behind WCW weren't necessarily behind WCW. They weren't bought in to WCW. So does recently I was thinking about it, going, so if they did make it and they put Vince out of business, like Bischoff said that they were about to do, does does Vince somehow, because the WCW folks don't want WCW, does he end up owning WCW? It's just, to me, it's a fascinating thought or thing to think of when you think of what could have been the future of both companies, considering how Vince was struggling at one point in time.
It's interesting. Obviously, once Ted Turner was out of the picture, WCW lost its great protector, someone who
Right.
always wanted wrestling on his station. That was the big thing that killed WCW, was when they got canceled.
Right.
They got canceled. I mean, they didn't want the company anymore, Time Warner,
Yep.
for many reasons. I mean, they were losing whatever it was, 60 million a year, plus the ratings they had guaranteed advertisers couldn't be matched, so they had to do all these
Yeah.
buybacks, and that hurt the company. And then they got canceled. And then TBS, who had wrestling on for its entire history, without Ted Turner behind the wheel, said we're going to cancel wrestling. I don't know, because part of it is, if they really do put the WWF out of business, whatever that entails, what does that mean? Does that mean they declare bankruptcy and operate for a while out of bankruptcy? Does that mean that Vince McMahon, it's in such bad shape that Vince McMahon would even consider selling it? Does Vince McMahon, out of pride, just ride it into the ground because he doesn't want anyone else running it? You don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
if they really declared bankruptcy, you got to think there is a possibility that while in bankruptcy, it would be sold to someone who would take on all the debt and try to operate it. And then you come back to the same issue you had with WCW. Vince McMahon, for all of his faults, is one guy running his own business.
Hmm.
Bischoff, it was never Bischoff's business. It was never Jim Herd's business.
Yeah.
They were just another spoke on the chain. Spoke on the wheel, I guess I should say.
Yeah. No, you're right.
It went up the ladder. It went up to a corporate ladder where people didn't understand wrestling or care to understand wrestling. So I don't know about the whole idea they put I mean, I guess there's different ways to look at it. What would have happened if they had put WWF out of business? It would have still self-destructed probably one way or another, WCW.
See, yeah, right. That's what brought me to the question, because I'm thinking about it, going, they put, if they do put let's say they put WWF out of business and WWF ceases to exist. You think about the status that WCW was at, though. It was not doing well. So because of that, do does Vince some kind of way find his way back into wrestling via, it sounds crazy, owning that company? I don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer to it, obviously, but it just, to me, it's just something to think about it, because I still think in my mind some kind of way Vince ends up in wrestling some kind of way.
Maybe. I mean, we know how cheap Vince McMahon bought WCW for when they went out of business. We don't know how it would work the other way around. If WWF went out of business, what would happen to WCW?
Right.
The other thing is, if WWF goes out of business at some point, I don't know, 97, 90, early 98, I guess you're maybe 96, you're looking at that time period where, from all accounts, they really were very close. They really were struggling.
Right.
It also affects WCW because there is no more requirement to offer guaranteed contracts. There's no more requirement to give creative control to anyone in a contract because you're not competing against another organization.
Right.
The reason Kevin Nash and Scott Hall got those giant deals they did with, favorite nation clauses was because he was trying to keep them from the WWF. The reason Hogan had complete creative control was he was trying to get them to sign with WCW after years of being a WWF guy. But if you didn't have that, all these renegotiations are different because it's, look, here's the deal you're getting. There's nowhere else to go. Very similar to what Vince McMahon could do right now.
Just doing right now. Yeah.
I don't know.
That's true.
I don't know what he'd get back. I mean, Vince McMahon's obviously a very prideful guy. If he went under with WWF, I don't know. See, here's the thing. I can't see him working for someone else. So he would need to have the money to buy WCW. And you would think, depending on what the value is, if WCW ends up in the same exact position where they get canceled and there's no network and you're buying contracts and a tape library, Vince McMahon would have had the money to do that personally, I believe. And even if he didn't, he would probably be able to get a bank to back him for it. Or, a venture capitalist to back him for that. Because, when WCW went out of business, what was it? $2 million? No, $4 million, I think, plus commitment to buy ads on TBS or TNT, whatever the station was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not crazy. It's not like it was $40 million. Vince McMahon had the money to do that. It's just, would he have wanted to?
Yeah. To me, it was just something that was interesting. You could play the what if game with wrestling so much when it comes to the territories closing and the different organizations shutting down and what happens if WCW does win the war. But to your point that you make, that's another thing to look at. If Vince does die, if WWF dies in '96 and goes out of business, you don't have the Monday Night Wars. That doesn't happen.
No.
There's no Monday Night Wars. There's so many things in wrestling that changes shape. I mean, there's no Stone Cold. Well, I mean, he was Stunning Steve. I mean, he was around, or the ringmaster at that point. But there's so many things that don't happen in the wrestling business if they fold.
I mean, that's the great thing about wrestling is when you actually look at it from a historical point of view, like everything else in life. If something doesn't happen, everything else doesn't happen. If Hogan doesn't leave the AWA, we talked about this on 605. If Hogan doesn't leave the AWA when he does, that means Gene Okerlund doesn't leave the AWA. That means David Schultz doesn't leave the AWA. Potentially, months later, Bobby Heenan and Jesse Ventura don't leave the AWA. So how does Vince McMahon go into Minnesota and compete without those guys, the key AWA guys? He probably doesn't.
He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't. I remember that. You guys talking about it. Fascinating discussion. He doesn't do it. It completely reshapes and reinvents the landscape of what happened.
Yeah. So
you have a whole new world.
One thing guaranteed is that if it had happened, Eric Bischoff would have been gloating on TV, to the nth degree for probably a few months at a minimum. But again, I think it's not even that the company would have self-destructed, which I think it would have. I think the characters like Bischoff would have self-destructed. I mean, I just think he wasn't equipped to handle the power and the pressure at a certain point. His ego ran out of control. Whether you believe the rumors or not that he had a substance abuse issue at that time, it's irrelevant. His ego was out of control. He was giving out ridiculous contracts, and he thought he was immune. He thought he was untouchable.
Yeah, that's true. It's just fascinating. I mean, I hate the fact that they did go under it. It's sad more than anything, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. One other thing before we start wrapping up. So there's something actually too, but I've been wanting to ask Cornette something, and you know Cornette well. So I'm just curious. You being someone that knows him very well, do you think you can? And I say the reason I reference Jim is because he's such a great mind when it comes to wrestling. If I were to ask Jim Cornette, can you book wrestling today the way it was booked during the territories in the early to mid '80s, and the way he booked Smoky Mountain in the '90s? Can you book it like that, or are we just too far gone? Have we just completely passed that
I think
era?
I think in a lot of respects you can in a vacuum. The same way Lucha Underground can. I mean, they can't look. You can do anything, whether it's successful or not is another story. But Lucha
That's true.
Underground can book this fantasy product because it's in this vacuum of this fantasy world. In terms of booking things like 80s Southern style wrestling, you need a controlled setting. You need a place to film it. You need fans who are going to be responsive in that manner too. You need fans who are going to cheer the baby faces and boo the heels, not fans who are going to chant about how awesome they are. That hurts it. That hurts it.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm a big believer that you could have a product that is a mix between all these things, Memphis and Mid Atlantic and Smoky Mountain, and especially Florida. And if you present it responsibly and seriously, it would work. If you have a commentator who people respect, who the heels don't go out there and insult and put their hands on. You know, no one ever put their hands on Gordon Solie. I mean, I shouldn't say ever. I mean, there was the incident with Don Morocco in Georgia, but that built to something. But in Florida, no one messed with Gordon Solie. And that was an edict from Eddie Graham. My show loses credibility if you put your hands on the lead announcer. He's the host of the program. And I think if you have that and you book things in a responsible way, even if things are ridiculous. Look, heels are ridiculous. Throughout wrestling history, heels are ridiculous. Dick the Bruiser is ridiculous. This guy's walking around like that. He's ridiculous, but it works. And you need to have a way that works. You know, you watch Raw now. The announcers are mind-numbingly awful. They have no credibility. They're just talking to you like you're a child and screaming at you, and they're not saying anything. And then the wrestlers talk to each other like everyone's a child. I would get rid of – I wouldn't want anyone walking into the ring with a microphone ever again. I want someone doing the interviews. And that's the one thing I thought Nitro did right. Gene Okerlund conducted interviews. He called someone out. He spoke to them. They left. It wasn't, hey, this guy's going out there with a microphone. What's he going to say? Oh, someone's music hit. What happened? Oh, there's another guy with a microphone. Wait, does that mean on the way out to confront the other man with the microphone, he passed by the guy controlling the music and he said, hey, hit my music in 5 seconds, and then I'm going to walk out. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. And I think it also kills the crowds because if the crowd is trained to not expect music when there's a run-in, they pop when there's a surprise run-in. But if they're all just sitting there waiting for the music, they're popping for just the music. And then after that, they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I think it would work. I think it would work in the right setting and the right presentation. I think in some respects you see it from NXT in some respects. But
you do a little bit. I know exactly what you mean with NXT, but at the same time, and to the point you're making, that is a slightly controlled environment too.
Right, but still you have the fan, you know, the Revival and American Alpha, which everyone knows I'm a huge fan of that feud, that series of matches. Fantastic matches, old school matches without feeling old school. It just feels like a great contest between two teams.
Right.
But instead of the fans booing the Revival or you know, just cheering for Alpha because they're the baby faces, they pop for the moves. They kind of react for the hot tags, but then they chant, "This is awesome," or "You fucked up," or whatever it may be. It's just lose yourself in the match. If I was a fan going to these shows, I'd want to lose myself in the match. Like that was the one thing I always loved about ECW. You had fans like John Baylor, the Straw Hat guy. Yeah. He wasn't chanting. You know, I mean, every now and then he did chant stuff, but he was pretending it was real. He was yelling at the heels and cheering the baby faces. That's what I would want to do at a wrestling show. I want to be part of the show and get into it. Yeah. When we went to Smoky Mountain wrestling shows, you know, we cheered the baby faces. We booed the heels. When the gangsters were big, we would scream at the gangsters and get on the gangsters and have them get in our faces. We could have just cheered them because they were the heels and, you know, it's a cool thing to do to cheer the heels, but we didn't. And I just wish more fans had that attitude. They went to a wrestling show to really escape and get part of it as opposed to sit there with some sort of, you know, half-assed analytical point of view, you know, worrying about work rate and all these words that they learned on the internet.
Right. I say this too. It's okay if you want to go there and to me, if you sit there and assess it, but don't try to hijack the show. I see that side of it where you're sitting there in the audience and maybe just being quiet and assessing it, but that's not what happens nowadays. What happens nowadays is the fans have some how now all of a sudden they want to be the show.
That's right.
So they hijack it and or attempt to hijack it. And it's in the pro and what I hate about that is not that they hijack it, but the WWE in its scripted nature, unlike in the territory days, the WWE has these promos all scripted so that these guys and ladies can't go off script.
That's right.
They can't respond to this hijacked part. The biggest example I'll give is the week that we did the show after WrestleMania when it was Flair and Charlotte in the ring, and Charlotte's supposedly cutting this promo with the new ladies belt and all this stuff, and they are hijacking they are hijacking that segment, the crowd. Just I forgot what they were chanting, but they were hijacking it, and Charlotte's getting flustered. You can tell, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking at Ric Flair, who is one of the greatest talkers in the history of professional wrestling, and he's sitting there with his dick in his hand because he can't grab the mic to do anything to save the segment, and it was just a terrible segment. And I don't even blame Charlotte because I actually think she probably could have said something, but she was too afraid to go off script because she didn't want to get her hand slapped.
Yeah, I'm very 100%, 100% against scripting in wrestling. And
It's a joke. I mean, Rod Price, my mentor, someone I love, always told me that. He's like, "How you gonna go out there with a script? How you gonna go out there?" He goes, "What if the fans ain't buying that crap that you're trying to sell them? You better be able to think and react to it. Otherwise, they're gonna crap on you, and they're gonna keep crapping on you because you're a little scripted and meeting their needs."
yeah,
So you better be able to react organically to the situation.
I mean, it's a difference between working a match and working a script. When you
Right.
work a match, you go out there and you react to how the crowd's moving, and you call it in the ring. When you're working a script, you're standing backstage with an agent before the match, and you're planning out each spot, and you go out there, and it's ridiculous. And back to the chanting. Like, I know I'm not alone. I hate the "This is awesome" chant.
I don't like it
And
either.
part of the thing is, if you really think about it, something happens. Usually nothing's happening when people start chanting it. "This is awesome." But as soon as you start it, it's like, it's not awesome anymore. And it's like you get to the point where they're chanting "This is awesome" and it has to end. Like, it starts off and then everyone does it, and then it kind of slows down. It's like, oh, they realize the awesome moment has passed. And now it's back to whatever was going on. It's so stupid. It really is.
There are rare occasions where I guess it's somewhat warranted. But now it's like anything, it's become trendy. It's the cool thing to do. So now it's kind of like just thrown out there when it's not really awesome.
Yeah.
So that's been my thing about why I don't necessarily like it too. Like I can see moments when I can see where it would be awesome, but I just it's become it's one of those things that's overused now, and they do it when it's not awesome.
Yeah, I mean,
And
think about Andre Hogan. They're standing there at WrestleMania 3 in the middle of the ring looking at each other. And WWF played it up like it was the first time they had wrestled, which, obviously wasn't true. And
right.
as they're walking slowly towards each other, the crowd is buzzing. Like, you feel like this excitement from the crowd. Now, imagine if instead of buzzing the way they did for big confrontations and matches and the beginning of match confrontation back in those days, if the crowd was standing up chanting "This is awesome." I mean, it's so asinine.
Right.
I hate chanting in general. Like, when I go to a baseball game, I hate chanting. I'm not a chanting kind of guy. I just don't, ain't my thing. I'd rather cheer and boo than, be part of the flock. I guess.
Let me say, it's funny because the only chant that I will ever do at any sporting event of any sort, whether that's wrestling or pro football, whatever, you guys talked about once on the 605, and that was the whole who that say they're gonna beat that dog that's turned into who that say they're gonna beat them Saints.
Yeah.
That's the only one that I will do at a game, and that's just because it's so ingrained in the culture now. You can't stop it, and it's a cool thing. I mean, it's a traditional thing now, but yeah, the whole chanting, and you make a good point. When Hogan and Andre are slowly walking towards each other, it's a buzz. There's fans clapping, they're cheering. It's a combination of it all, which brings the energy level to a fever pitch before they even touch each other.
Yeah.
You need those moments again in wrestling, and I firmly believe those moments can happen. I do. I just think that people have just said, well, that they don't book it right, so now it's like, oh well, now we got to chant "This is awesome" when it's not really awesome.
people need a reason to be entertained. Again, you watch Raw, and the fans have now been trained to react to music, to pop for music, and not really give a shit during matches. So
Yeah.
they need something to entertain themselves. That's what it's coming down to. It's all about being entertained at a show. And when you get to the point where you feel you have to entertain yourself, that's probably a problem.
That's usually a bad sign.
Yeah.
Hey, one more question, and I'm gonna let you plug everything that you got going on with 605. But you guys talked a couple of episodes back on your, not a couple, more than a couple. You talked about holiday card spectaculars during the territory days. Man, I I like I like that they used to do that at that time. One of the sad things though in today's world, you couldn't do them only because I think that in my just a humble opinion, nowadays you got the NFL on Thanksgiving night. You generally have basketball games on Christmas Day. I just want I remember the days when the holidays were great for the territories and wrestling and nowadays it's like man I do miss that about young and I never got to go into to any of those events that they had on the special days, the holidays. So but still it was it's that nostalgia thing. You guys talked about it maybe on like episode 5 of your show or 4. I can't remember which one, but it was a good discussion. If anybody's listening to this, go back and listen to the 605 Super Podcast episode 4 or 5. But it was very, very interesting discussion about the holiday spectaculars and the I guess I'll call them super cards. Would you call them that, Brian?
I would. I mean, that's the way each territory built it up. Starcade was on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
There were Christmas cards everywhere, world class everywhere. I mean, world class is Labor Day Star Wars, Memorial Day Star Wars. Every holiday had an event. I actually have in my hands right now a program from Mid-South Wrestling. This is from actually your town, New Orleans. November 27th, 1980, Thanksgiving night at the Superdome. Hey, want to hear this card? Opening match.
Go ahead.
Coco Samoa versus Mike Miller. Okay, so you don't have to show up for the opening match. It's good to know. Added attraction, Jim Garvin versus Ron Cheatham. You know what? Second match, you can go get your popcorn, get a couple dozen beers. Third match, a special tag team match. Wahoo McDaniel and Stephen Little Bear versus the Mexican Angel and the Turk from Turkey, obviously.
Yeah.
Louisiana State Heavyweight Championship. Jake the Snake Roberts defending against Precious Paul Ellering. So now the card's starting to really pick up.
Yeah.
Special event, Ted DiBiase versus Maniac Mark Lewin. USA versus Russia. Now here's Dusty Rhodes coming in as an attraction versus Nikolai Volkov. Special challenge tag team match, Big Ernie Ladd and Bad Leroy Brown, someone people forget very often, versus Junkyard Dog and Cowboy Bill Watts. You know that was a big match there that night.
Yeah.
And then 2 more matches for the North American Heavyweight Championship, no disqualification. The Grappler. And for his hometown, it just has about 20 question marks, which is great. He's the champion, defending against Killer Carl Cox. And the last match, a lights out match, not sanctioned by Mid-South Wrestling. 1 fall, no disqualification. Paul Orndorff versus Big Ernie Ladd. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 matches on Thanksgiving night at the Superdome, which was by far the biggest building Mid-South Wrestling ran in.
Oh, yeah.
That tells you what those holidays meant. The fact that's what they ran on. And they ran on every day. And, the other thing is they ran on 4th of July. They ran every day. It was easier in the territories. Like Mid-Atlantic, you could potentially, depending on where you lived, if you worked there, have dinner with your family or, a meal with your family for one of these holidays and make a show. You would see your family on that day. But once you start going national, it's national touring. I think the WWE now gives guys off Christmas week or, at least Christmas Day so they can be home with their family. But in the territory days, everyone ran on holidays because it was usually the biggest night of the year for business on Thanksgiving and Christmas.
I heard Jim Cornette say one time that, back then, families would eat. They'd need something to do that night. So what do? They went to the matches.
Yeah.
They spent a little money, went to the matches, and every territory, every building was full, and that's how the holidays were spent.
I mean, think of it this way. How many channels did they have? Maybe 6?
Exactly.
What was open in town? The movie theater was probably closed. Everything else, the ice skating rink was probably closed. Everything was probably closed. The one thing that's open is the wrestling show.
The wrestling show.
And it wasn't just a wrestling show. Usually it was a big card, something that had been built up over time.
Well, of course. I mean, look, Mid-South ran the freaking Superdome. So before anyone wants to say Vince McMahon was the one who ran big stadiums, hold on, Chief.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how big the Superdome is. I've been there plenty of times in my life. It is a ginormous stadium. I know Bill Watts didn't have 70,000 people in there, but he had a lot of people in
No,
there.
and Vince
Listen,
and the WWF, WWE has gone to New Orleans many times throughout the years. And until this previous WrestleMania in New Orleans, the record was still JYD versus Michael Hayes.
exactly.
So,
Territory days.
exactly.
So that goes to show you the popularity of it at that time, man. So, hey, Brian, that's all I had today, man. I appreciate you doing this on such short notice, but I want you to go ahead and, this will drop on July the 12th. So I want you to go ahead and plug everything that you got going on with the 605 Super Podcast with you and your co-host David Bixenspan. Everything that y'all got going on over there.
605 Super Podcast, the show I host each and every week. Your one-stop shop for classic wrestling talk, as well as talk about cult wrestling favorites and made-up characters and fringe weirdos. Anything really having to do with wrestling other than current wrestling, we cover on the Super Podcast. A lot of really cool things, depending on when you listen to it and when you listen to this. We have an interview with Don Leibel broken up into two parts. Don Leibel was the person who read the news on John Arezzi's Pro Wrestling Spotlight radio show. He was a longtime photographer for magazines. He's a writer. He's someone who had a friendship and a relationship with many people in wrestling, from Boyd Pierce, who was his best friend, to Killer Kowalski, to Eddie Gilbert, to Big John Studd. So we talk about this. We talk about all of his relationships with these people, but we also get some inside scoops from him that you don't really hear on other podcasts. He was at Killer Kowalski's shows when Triple H first started, when China first started. We get to hear what they were like when they were rookies. He worked for the magazines. You get to hear which magazines paid on time, which magazines were trying to rip people off, and exactly how much you would get for photos from magazines. He'll tell you why he thinks Bill Apter is maybe overrated in terms of his presence and his prominence as Mr. Wrestling Magazines. Fascinating discussion. He also goes into one of the wildest stories we've ever had on 605, the Super Podcast. The time he was kidnapped, I guess that's the word I can use, by an ECW wrestler, a wild and crazy adventure which led to him to walking away from the wrestling business. So that and much more. Each and every week, we try to bring you different guests. Jim Cornette's been on a number of times. We had an interview recently with Polish Joe Chupik, an AWA producer, lots of inside scoops about AWA. But if you love territories, we try to cover all that. We had Bobby Simmons, who worked for Georgia Championship Wrestling, inside stories that you wouldn't hear on any other show. And we have a lot more of those coming up in the weeks to come. We also do what ifs. We answer questions. What if Magnum TA haven't been in a car wreck? All these things that listeners send in, we try to answer each and every week on the show. I don't think there's a show out there which mixes humor and information as well as we do on the 605 Super Podcast. So please check us out. If you like me here on this show, you may like me there too, or you may hate me. I mean, you never really know. But the show's available at 605pod.com. You can go there, you can stream it, you can download it, or we're on iTunes or Stitcher. We're in the Android store. We're all over the place. Anywhere you want to get. I mean, there's illegal sites where you could download stuff. Even though we're a free show, you can download us there. It's really amazing how this all works. So you can check out all that. And of course, check us out on Facebook. And on Facebook, we are facebook.com/superpodcast. Lots of cool stuff there. And you can follow me on Twitter at GreatBrianLast.
And I can speak from experience. I'll say this. Do yourself a favor and go back to episode 1 when Brian and David first started doing the show, because you'll do yourself some justice with getting, I think you told me, all the inside jokes and all the things that you guys talk about, because it's truly, what you guys are doing is truly timeless. Like, part of our show is we do talk about the current product as well as past things, but you guys are all about the past and the territory. So if you go back and listen to episode 1, you're actually you'll learn. It's not dated, I should say, is the word I'm looking for. So it's not like you're listening to a raw review from July the 11th or something like that. So go check out all of the older episodes as well, because they are just as good. And there's just so much there, man. I'm telling you, I listened to the one where y'all talked about the JYD and it was just good stuff. Just I can't tell you, man, how much I enjoy it and have enjoyed spreading the word. And then there's these the super universe too that I'm just pretty much infatuated with at this point. Those guys are comedic at best. Denim Fritz, if you're listening to this, Denim Fritz, I don't know who you are, but you're funny. You set the bar higher each and every week. Every time I log on to Twitter and I see something from you, I mean, I've actually turned on your notifications so I don't miss them.
Yeah, yeah, the other day I think he said that was it Bronco and David Manning kidnapped Mark Lawrence and were shooting bottle rockets out of his ass. Something. Just yeah, that guy is a comedic genius, I gotta say.
I don't know who in the
Even
hell
do I.
this dude is, but it's just the stupidest stuff. I mean, he said something. I'm trying to look for it. Something about Iceman King Parsons recently. Iceman just told me he had his girl turning tricks. I had no idea she was a magician.
See, it's funny on its face, but when you think about the idea of denim Fritz von Erich, of 1984 Fritz von Erich dressed in denim, thinking these things, like, in that voice, like, hey, I can't. Iceman just called me that his girl's turning tricks. What's he talking? Like, just this out of touch older guy. It's the funniest thing ever, and he loves Murder She Wrote, and he loves Matlock.
Golden Girls.
Yeah.
He said, I can't do the voice. I had the original Final Deletion. Where's Lance Von Erich?
Yeah, I mean, it's genius. The guy who does it, I don't know who he is. I've communicated with him a few times, but it wasn't like he said, like, hey, by the way, psst, here's my real name. I have no idea who it actually is, but I'm a big fan of his work.
I'm a I'm a big fan of his work too. Last one he said, with all this talk about hoes, Iceman Parsons must love the garden. I just can't take it. This guy, whoever he is. So, just very very good stuff, man. I've enjoyed listening to the Super Universe and checking out the show. So, hey, I appreciate you coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the great Brian Lass on Booking the Territory Pro Wrestling Podcast. Brian, we'll do it again in 3 or 4 months. We'll do the quarterly thing if you're up for it. And I appreciate having you on.
Sounds good. Tally ho!